Welcome to VCR, a vintage cinema rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
And I cooked him up with some fava beans and a nice shanty. Oh, that's the wrong
and
movie.
You're still on the old movie.
That's right. Actually, before we get into it, I did start reading the novelization of Silence of the Lambs.
Nice!
Do you remember how I pointed out that in the book, Dr. Lecter had a sixth finger and red eyes, and you thought I was bullshitting you?
Yeah.
It's true. It's right
that's
there.
actually a thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I guess the author wasn't pulling no punches.
Yeah, just really making him to a weird monster. Anyway, so we did Silence of the Lambs as part one of our Jodie Foster series. One of, in both mine and your opinions, one of the greatest movies ever made.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun with that one.
Absolute pleasure to watch it.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided to, and honestly, this was mostly my pick because this is something that I was heavily interested in seeing.
Right.
For part two of our Jodie Foster film series, we're doing the movie Contact from 1997. And you're going to give a quick rundown of the plot in a sec here, but it's kind of like a sci-fi meets science meets political
meets character drama.
Yeah, meets religious drama, like
socio-religious commentary.
Yeah, this movie has a lot going on and a lot of different ideas and thoughts to juggle.
It certainly does, and we'll talk about how well it juggles those, but yeah. Should I just jump right into the plot?
Yeah, let's get into the plot, and then we'll get into Jodie Foster, the actor, and the rest of the cast and crew of this film.
Sure. So we should start off by saying that this is actually based on a book written by Carl Sagan.
Yes.
Who everyone has undoubtedly heard of as one of the big scientific minds of the previous century.
Yeah, he kind of lives in this weird bubble, right, of being extraordinarily prominent in like the 70s, 80s, 90s kind of thing. So if you're a kid of those eras, you've definitely heard of Carl Sagan, or you should have heard of Carl Sagan, even in school.
I think where most people know him from is from BBC did the Cosmos series back in the 80s.
Yes, I love that show.
Yeah, where he's just standing by the beach talking about science for like 8 hours.
The other thing of Carl Sagan's, if you've never heard it, it's really just a quote from him called "The Pale Blue Dot," and the picture of Earth as Voyager 1 kind of leaves the solar system. It's maybe one of my favorite science quotes of all time.
Do you have it?
It's honestly probably too long for this podcast. But it's just basically like, and I'm going to butcher it right now because Carl Sagan is, not only was he a fantastic scientist, but he was an absolute master with words.
Oh yeah, he was brilliant.
Think Neil deGrasse Tyson, but a little bit more likable.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good way of putting it. Apparently, I read this that I think, what's his name? Carl Sagan was the one who actually accepted Neil deGrasse Tyson's letter. Like, he accepted his application into wherever it was.
Oh, cool.
Or maybe he didn't accept it, but he read his letter and said, this is a good letter, and he invited him to come take a tour of the campus.
Yeah. But essentially, the Pale Blue Dot is just a musing over, this little dot, this blue dot that we live on, and how all of humanity has lived and died on this little blue dot, and how small and insignificant it really is, and how important it is that all of us have lived on this space together, kind of thing. It's much more poetic than I could ever put it, but it's a little lengthy for our episode, which is already lengthy enough. Just know that Carl Sagan, if you don't know who Carl Sagan is, I think that's a shame, and you should
shame on you.
Work on fixing it, because Carl Sagan's just a beautiful mind.
He's a really cool guy. Yeah.
But anyway, we should talk about the
movie.
Plot of Contact.
Jodie Foster stars as Dr. Eleanor Arroway, a brilliant astrophysicist who is considered to be kind of a quack, someone who's sort of wasting her time in the sense that she's working for SETI, this organization that is searching for alien life in the cosmos. So she's sort of ostracized by the scientific community because they feel that she's wasting her talents on something unworthy of her talents. So their funding is about to be cut, and she just randomly goes out one day to listen, and they are contacted by extraterrestrial life.
Right.
And they contact them in like strange mathematic equations, and it's most of the movie is just trying to decipher what the aliens want, how they can communicate back with them, like how to look at these equations they're getting. And
it's also about the consequences, right, of first contact on a global scale.
Yeah, it sparks quite a bit of religious uproar in particular, where people don't necessarily like the thought of there being a higher power that isn't the higher power we're familiar with. And that's kind of where Matthew McConaughey's character, Palmer Joss, comes in. He's sort of this, I don't know, handsome spiritual yoga teacher type guy. He's he was enrolled in the seminary but then left, and then at a certain point in the movie he becomes, I'm not even really sure what his role is, but he's almost like the spiritual advisor of the White House.
He's a novelist essentially, right, writing about spirituality, religion, and all of that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that gets a little bit later in the film when you're talking about that. But essentially, like, they're just bringing all these different minds and ideological minds together to kind of decide what their next steps are going to be with dealing with this contact, right? So that's where he's brought in later. But, there's an element of romance because he meets Jodie Foster's character very early on in the film.
Mm-hmm.
And things, there's a spark, but things don't really happen. And then it's their interactions years later as the movie kind of moves along.
Yeah, they have a one-night stand, and then she very coldly brushes him off afterwards.
Right. But, and part of it's, really interesting, and it's something that comes up throughout the movie, too, is because she's extreme side of science, and he's, like, not a religious extremist, but he very devout in what he believes in, I would say.
He's very much like a youth group pastor. Like,
yeah,
he's kind of like hip and cool and non-judgmental, but he's very, very, he stands true to his beliefs. And that is almost kind of the central conflict of the movie, is this idea of faith versus religion.
Yeah, and with politics mixed in as well.
Yeah, and it's very interesting how this movie frames that conflict.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, and I think that you've done a really great job at not spoiling a lot of the film, because the film takes a few very interesting twists and turns. Like, there were some moments that I wasn't expecting to happen.
Yeah, me too.
Some very, very big scenes. It gets a little bit more heavy into the sci-fi by the end, but honestly, like, from a sci-fi standpoint, I would say it's about a 2.5 hour movie. The first, like, almost 2 hours of this film, everything's pretty grounded in reality of what's possible, right?
Yeah, it's almost like it's barely sci-fi up until the very end.
Right.
And even then, it's kind of plausible to a point.
Right.
I mean, there's that thing that happens at the end that we'll talk about next week that sort of blows the lid off everything, but for the most part, it's very, grounded.
It's almost sci-fi light in a sense, which is really cool because all of the other aspects at play here I thought were very interesting and very captivating in my opinion.
It's very much a movie rooted in its time too, in the sense that it's very much takes place in the late 90s, the mid to late 90s. So, it's interesting seeing that. Okay, I don't know if we should save this for the next episode, so you can tell me to shut up if you want, but, like, can we talk about the Bill Clinton scene?
Let's save Bill Clinton until the spoiler full episode. Let's just say that Bill Clinton pops up here and there, and it's very well cut into the film. I was, throughout the film, every time he made an appearance, I was like, did Bill Clinton show up to do this movie?
Yeah, I looked that up immediately. I'm like, did the President of the United States show up on set for whatever? But yeah, no, it's interesting what this movie did is, when the aliens are first discovered, Bill Clinton shows up and addresses the nation. And it's so seamless where you're just like, you're like, wait, is that Bill Clinton? Like, is that the president?
Yeah.
But they had taken some archival footage of him and just sort of reworked
Very
it.
recent footage even. But we'll talk about that when we get into the spoiler-full discussion, because it's a really interesting discussion, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk characters and people you may know. So you've already mentioned Jodie Foster. This is 1997, so this is post Silence of the Lambs. And her career has kind of had, a really interesting trajectory. She was a massive child star. Silence of the Lambs, at that point, she's writing her own checks, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
She directs Little Man Tate, which is, a little bit of a mixed reviewed movie, but I think won a couple of Oscars, actually. And then the rest of the 90s, the little bit of bumps in the road.
Some ups, some downs.
Yeah, like she does Shadows and Fog with Woody Allen. She does Maverick with Mel Gibson, which is a movie that I'm kind of interested in checking out at some point.
Two not at all problematic directors. But...
Yeah. And then does some other kind of films that I wouldn't necessarily say hold up or are remembered fondly. But she does some TV acting in the 90s as well for like Frasier and The X-Files. And then she does this movie. And I kind of want to ask you now. So you've got Jodie Foster in Silence of the Lambs, Jodie Foster in Contact. Very different film portrayals.
Mm-hmm.
Which one do you prefer? Which one do you think she did better with? Which role did she do better with?
Definitely Clarice. Definitely Clarice. I mean, they're very similar characters in the sense that they're women in male-dominated fields that are sort of being, that she has to fight harder for her voice to be heard. There are some scenes later in this movie where her male boss is very clearly taking credit for her work.
Yep.
So, and like, it's almost like the same character, but in different settings. Even the backstory with the dead parents is slightly similar too.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I didn't even consider that.
Like Clarice's dead father was a sheriff, and her mother had died in childbirth, and then Dr. Arroway's character in this movie was a science guy who nourished her love of science, and then he dies, so she carries on his work. So they're almost the same character in a way, but I do think her portrayal as Clarice was better, which is not to say that her portrayal in this movie was bad, but like, I didn't find Dr. Arroway nearly as compelling as Clarice.
Which is funny because I actually liked her performance in Contact more than I liked her performance in...
Okay.
Yeah, I thought there was a lot of depth to her character. She is the front and central focal point of the film. And it might just be the fact that in Silence of the Lambs, Anthony Hopkins just absolutely steals the show.
Potentially.
There's a little bit more range that's needed to play this role, I think. And I thought she did a really great job with what she was given. I think that, if I had to say right now which film is the better film, I would say Silence of the Lambs by a mile.
Oh, yeah.
But I do really enjoy Jodie Foster's portrayal in this film.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. Like, there's no... Like, Silence of the Lambs is very much a duet between Jodie Foster and Anthony Hopkins, but this one is Contact is very clearly her movie. Mm-hmm. Like, she is in basically every scene for the most part.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I thought it was really interesting. I think that she should have won probably an Oscar for this film. I didn't look at who won the Oscars that year, but she did win, I believe, a Golden Globe for her portrayal in this one, which is, like the Oscar light, right?
Yeah, good enough.
Yeah, but I thought her performance was fantastic in this one. I really, really enjoyed it a lot.
Okay.
That was the year of the Titanic, actually.
Oh, how could we forget? 1997. Yeah.
Yeah. So
sorry, Jodie.
What's her name? Didn't even get win for Titanic.
Kate Winslet?
Yeah.
Who did win that year?
It was Helen Hunt for As Good as It Gets.
Oh, Helen Hunt's pretty cool. I guess we'll give her that one.
But yeah, anyway, so I thought she did great in this one. So after this, Jodie Foster's career, it kind of struggles a little bit more. Like I was almost kind of surprised reading about her career in the 2000s. She kind of had some major bumps in the road. A lot of her films were incredibly successful.
I'm trying to think of movies she's even been in the last 20 years, and I'm kind of struggling.
Yeah, she's directed a few films. None of them have been extremely highly reviewed. Like she did The Beaver, which came out with Mel Gibson. And that was
I did hear good things
director.
about that one. Yeah.
Very mixed reviews on that. But part of that also was because that was the smack dab in the middle of Mel Gibson being the worst.
Being the worst, yeah.
So
pretty brave of her, I guess. Yeah.
Well, it came out after they had filmed it and everything. So this was at a time where they didn't just completely shut down projects because the main actor was problematic.
Well, hey, The Flash came out this June, and
yeah. If anything, The Flash maybe shouldn't have come out.
Yeah.
But that's the world that we live in. So there's a lot of actually other interesting actors that make appearances in here. And you've already mentioned Palmer Joss, the religious leader, played by Matthew McConaughey.
That's right. Matthew McConaughey. A very young Matthew McConaughey.
A very young Matthew McConaughey.
Peak surfer dude Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah. You know what? Very charismatic in this film still, though. Like, you can see the spark of a good actor in this film.
No. His character was pretty good. Like,
yeah.
You know?
Like, I thought his portrayal did a lot of justice to what he was trying to do with the character, right?
Well, he is a religious man in real life, so
yeah.
I'm sure he...
Spiritual,
yeah. Yeah, he brought something to it.
And, you know, Matthew McConaughey is already a household name. I don't really have to talk much about Matthew McConaughey. The only thing that I will say is, we're definitely going to talk about this when we get to who this movie is for, but just keep in mind the idea of Interstellar. Start thinking about the movie Interstellar a little bit.
Oh, yeah, fair.
They share a lot of DNA, and we'll talk about that and who this movie is for.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that there was the scientist who was kind of running the whole SETI program, and, you know, he kind of goes above Ellie's head, and, you know, he's always kind of controlling things, dealing with all the politics. So David Drumlin, he is played by Tom Skerritt, who was a very familiar looking face. I don't know what it was. He's kind of plays a lot of colonel and doctor types, so he's kind of got like that kind of face.
Certainly got the look for it, yeah.
I most recently watched the first Top Gun about a year ago, and he plays Viper in Top Gun. He's kind of like one of the instructor guys. He also is Dallas in the original Alien movie, which is pretty cool.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
There's actually two actors from the original Alien movie in this film, which is pretty cool. There's a few other kind of big actors in this. Jenna Malone plays the child Ellie. She does a really great job playing that character, and I thought that the flashback scenes of her as a child were actually done extremely well. And we'll talk about that a little bit in the spoilers for sure, because there's a lot of technical effects to those scenes that I thought were really effective.
Mm-hmm.
So you may know Jenna Malone as Joanna Mason from The Hunger Games. William Fichtner is in this film.
Yeah, I love that guy.
Yeah, kind of one of those that guys, right? Like, he's just, you're like, oh, it's that guy.
Yeah, he was Alex Mahone in Prison Break.
Yeah, and he's also in the movie Heat as well, so we've talked about him before, actually. He
also in the
pops
very
up.
first scene of The Dark Knight.
Yes,
For
yes.
one scene.
Yes,
but,
actually. Yeah, very memorable scene, though. James Wood also makes an appearance here. He's like one of the political advisor guys who...
Like a security officer type guy?
Yeah. He's got such a memorable face, and I was trying to think of where I'd seen him last, and it was in Casino. He was also in Videodrome and Once Upon a Time in America.
Those are great movies, yeah.
Yeah, no, he's a great film career. Not necessarily as relevant in the 2020s as he was back then, but still a very famous actor of that time period.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of the actors I just was going to quickly mention just because they make like smaller appearances. Like Rob Lowe makes an appearance. This is pre-West Wing Rob Lowe, and he's kind of playing a political advisor. Very interesting portrayal. His accent's very strange.
Ian Perkins, yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. Like, every time he showed up, I'm like, I forgot you were in this movie. Like, they don't really give him much to do.
No, they don't. David Morse, the father, another guy who was like, oh, I've seen him before. Angela Bassett, John Hurt, and I don't know, did you know who Jake Busey was before you seeing this film?
No,
He's the religious fanatic.
Oh, the guy with the wig.
Yeah.
Blonde hair?
That's Gary Busey's son.
Huh.
Yeah, he was in a few very famous films of the 90s, like Starship Troopers, which is a fantastic film.
Huh.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, there's Jake Busey. But
is Gary Busey
anyway,
still alive? Yes, he is.
He is, actually. I also Googled that this morning.
Yeah. Huh. Congratulations.
Yeah, have some current sexual assault stuff going on against Gary Busey, but is anybody surprised by that?
No.
He's had a complicated life, but we don't need to talk about Gary Busey.
Yeah, we're not here to talk about Gary Busey.
Director of the film, Robert Zemeckis.
I was so surprised when I saw that.
He's like kind of a big deal.
Yep.
I don't think his name carries the same level of respect that it should. And you want to name some of the movies that you've seen of his? Because I know you've seen a few of them and love a few of them.
Well, let's just talk about the big one. He did Back to the Future in the 80s. He did all three of them, actually.
He did. Yes, one of the biggest movie franchises of all time.
He's also done one of my favorite movies, Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yes, I was expecting you to say that one as well.
Great movie. More recently, he's also done... He did the Beowulf adaptation in 2007, if anybody remembers that.
He did Polar Express in that time period as well.
Yeah, so he must have been into that early CG motion capture stuff.
You missed some of the big ones from the 90s. He did Forrest Gump and Castaway.
Oh, yeah. So him and Tom Hanks are pretty close for a while.
Yeah, they actually shared a lot of films together. I just brought up the three big ones, but I think they even had a film in the last 5-10 years together. Robert Zemeckis should be a household name, and I've heard his name before, but I've never really considered him, up on the pedestal of greats. But
he's certainly fallen off a bit in the last little bit. Like, he did the Pinocchio movie last year that I don't think anybody liked, but...
Yeah, pretty critically reviled, so...
Yeah, and then... I'm just looking at his filmography. He also did Romancing the Stone in 1984.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, pretty cool guy.
Yeah, and this is a pretty good showcase, I think, of his directorial abilities. There's some really cool camera shots in this film.
It's kind of got that whimsical, sentimental flair at times.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially towards the end.
Yeah, the vibes are, similar to something like Forrest Gump. It tugs at the heartstrings pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
So who is this movie for? The obvious go-to is if you're interested in sci-fi, if you're interested in, the cosmos and space, this is a fantastic film. It's written by Carl Sagan, one of the greatest scientific personalities ever, up there with Bill Nye the Science Guy. And it's great. Like, it's a very interesting look at a realistic take on what would happen if we made contact and what would the next steps be, basically.
I've never seen Arrival, but I'm assuming this is pretty much Arrival, but 20 years earlier.
So I did think about talking about Arrival at this point in time. And you can definitely draw some comparisons. So I think there's a bit of compare and contrast with those two, because Arrival's a sci-fi movie about first contact, but it's Denis Villeneuve, so it's very...
Oh, say no more. I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, it's a lot more atmospheric, and it's actually more at its core about family than it is about first contact or, like the struggles between politics, science, and religion kind of thing.
Okay.
So I actually would say this film compares a lot more to something like Interstellar, being the obvious one to me, especially because Matthew McConaughey has a role in both films. There's some elements to do with wormholes and theory of relativity that takes, it's applicable to both of these movies. The other movie that I actually thought of as well watching this was the film Don't Look Up.
Really?
Don't Look Up's a lot more of a satire. Like, it's a lot funnier than this movie is, but it shares a lot of the same themes of, you know, again, the conflict between religion, science, and politics. It's just, like I said, Don't Look Up is a lot more politically motivated, I would say.
Yeah.
And it's a satire, and it definitely leans into, you know, a more liberal ideology, whereas this one's taking a look at, you know, everything as a whole. Like, it's taking a much broader look at what these conflicts are between these three main ideologies.
Yeah, fair enough.
You know, I did actually like Don't Look Up, but I think that this film does that kind of struggle between those three a lot more effectively.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen it, so I can't really comment. But yeah, in terms of who this movie's for, yeah, I don't know. It's not a traditional sci-fi movie, but it's more of a, how would I say it? It's more of a thinker than a shower. You know what I mean? So it's almost like if you're interested in like character dramas, and again, that struggle between faith and science, you're probably going to have a good time.
I think that more people would like this film than have seen this film. You know, this isn't a film that gets talked about in like top 10 lists, or a film that, you know, people bring up as one of the greats, but I had a lot of fun with this movie. I was completely fascinated by it. I thought everything was super interesting. And again, like, you know, I'm a bit of a space nerd, so
yeah,
all of
you
that.
are.
Like, I've already seen, like, I've watched Cosmos and everything like that, so I knew who Carl Sagan was beforehand. So for me, this appealed to me a lot, but like, Jess really enjoyed watching this, and you know, that's not something that she is interested.
I'm genuinely surprised.
So yeah, I had an absolute blast with this film. It sounds like you're maybe quite a bit lower on the spectrum of enjoyment.
I liked this film. I didn't love it. It really came alive for me in the third act, but I did find some of the stuff. I did find some of the conflict between science and religion a bit heavy-handed. I
would actually say that becomes the most heavy-handed in the third act. There's one point in time when there's a quote from a character, and I was like, wow, he said the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about too. Yeah. So I guess to me, like, I didn't mind it so much in the third act, because that's when everything was tying itself together. Then I was like, okay, sure, I get it. But
and this film being, you know, 2.5 hours long, the subject matter, in a sense, it's almost like an epic. And I thought that the way the film ended as well is, in a sense, similar to an epic, where there's a lot of endings to the film.
It's very Spielbergian. It's a very Spielbergian ending.
It ties a lot of things up while also leaving, you know, a little bit of ambiguity, right? And I'm not somebody who generally likes ambiguity in my endings, but I thought that this one did a pretty effective job at that.
That's true. You do not like ambiguity, but no.
But I thought the implications of the ending of this film were very interesting.
This is jumping ahead a bit. This isn't really okay. You can cut this out if you want later.
Don't talk too much details about Act 3, I would say.
Let me just say I liked the final shot. The final scene is very quiet. It's just Jodie Foster, and I liked it.
Yes.
I was just kind of like, cool, I'm into it.
Yeah. I guess the other quick thing that I'll say is that this film and Carl Sagan wanting to write this was heavily inspired by the film 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And you can kind of feel a little bit of the DNA of that film in this one as well. So that would kind of be the connecting piece to the past. And then, like I said, Interstellar, Don't Look Up were the two immediate films of the present that I thought about watching this one. I really want to go back and watch Interstellar. I just haven't had the time to carve out like 3 hours for that film.
Yeah, I don't think Interstellar is a movie I would watch a second time.
Yeah, well, and you're not a big sci-fi guy, right?
Yeah, that's the other caveat. I bounce off a lot of sci-fi movies, you know?
Yeah. You know, that's our experiences going in, right? So I'm very high on this film because I'm a big sci-fi guy. You're at like a pretty good expectation level of this film. Like you had a good time, you enjoyed it, but it wasn't like, you know, an incredible, like, you know, it wasn't Silence of the Lambs like mind blowing to you.
No. And we'll get into my gripes next week, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's completely fair. So I guess that's where to leave it at. Is you've heard my opinion as a big sci-fi buff. You've heard your opinion as somebody who doesn't tend to, really connect to sci-fi all the time.
You know what this movie could have used more of? Swords. Swords and wizards. Then I would be much higher on it.
Yeah. Whereas that's something that I don't think Hollywood does a great job of. But
no,
anyway,
it breaks my heart every single time.
When to watch? I think this is a really great Sunday evening film. This movie has a lot of heart, and I'm looking for movies that are more character drama, movies with a little bit more heart in them for my Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening watch.
We need that hit of serotonin before we face the next week.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised, actually, that this movie wasn't airing when I was a kid on TV on a regular basis, because I feel like this movie is, it's like a 3-hour, shove as many commercials into it as you need to, get to the 3 hours. And it's a pretty good, family watch, I think.
Kinda, yeah.
So, like I said, I'm kind of surprised that it didn't do a lot of syndication on TV when I was picking movies on Sunday evening to watch with the family.
I will say, I wasn't crazy about this movie, but I'm surprised I've never heard of it, and I'm surprised it didn't do better.
I had already heard of Contact. I'm surprised and a little ashamed of myself that I hadn't seen it beforehand. But that's here and there. That's for a later discussion in our deep dive.
Well, Blake, there's plenty more to be ashamed about.
True.
Heyo. All right.
Any other ideas when to watch?
Yeah, I'd say this is more of an afternoon watch for me.
Yeah.
It's not like a horror or like a thriller. It's more of it's wholesome. It's charming. It's not a big,
No, it's not a big blockbuster, right?
It's not really it's not really a blockbuster, and it's not going to draw intense emotions out of you. Well, it's not going to draw intense fear or horror or suspense out of you.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's something to quietly ponder.
Quietly ponder.
Where to watch right now, it's streaming on the MGM channel, which has a free week-long subscription. Not even a month-long subscription. What are you doing, MGM channel?
Yeah, come on, guys.
But, I did the free subscription, and it was pretty good quality, so...
There you go.
No complaints.
Guess where I watched it?
YouTube, as always.
Yep. Rented it.
Nice. Yeah, and that's it for our spoiler-free discussion of Contact. I'm really excited to talk about this movie in spoiler-full details. There's a lot of interesting thoughts and ideas in this film, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun dissecting it.
I think we will too.
Cool. Yeah. Well then, until next time, don't forget to tell your dad.
Don't forget to tell your dad. Look, actually, that is kind of gonna bring it back to. We're gonna bring some dad energy to next week's episode. I'll tell you what.
Okay.
This movie has quite a bit of dads in it.
That's true. This is a father. You know what? We didn't recommend it, but it's a father-daughter movie.
It essentially is, which I actually found kind of touching when that came back around.
Yeah, you know what?
If it ever comes back around.
We didn't recommend that, but that's not a bad idea. Nice father-daughter movie.
There you go.
Cool. All right. See you next week.
Let's look to the stars.